Hello, and welcome back to the Argyle CXUX for Retail Leadership Forum, CX Success 2023. My name is Nick with Argyle. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths for the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, Tyler Altrip, Director CXM Best Practices, Sprinklr. We are excited to have Tyler for his thought leadership presentation titled The New Storefront, How Retail Can Embrace Conventional Commerce. Welcome, Tyler. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nicholas. Both my personal title and our session title snuck up on you, but that's okay. I appreciate that nice introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, from wherever you're joining us. We're very, very happy to have you. I won't read this whole thing, but just a quick little bit about myself. Nicholas introduced me this way, and the team that I'm a part of within Sprinklr, we do call CX Best Practices. If we want to be a little simpler about it, it's essentially our in-house industry consulting organization. And so I have the unique privilege to spend a lot of time with our retail clients, and actually had a chance to meet and spend time with more than 25 of them last year. And so as we were thinking about what would be an interesting topic for us today, I wanted to bring something that has been a real conversation with almost all of those retail organizations. And that ultimately is, what is conversational commerce? Where do we start? What are considerations? And then what does this actually look like from brands and organizations that are already embracing it? Now, you might notice just from some of the organizations I've been lucky enough to be a part of, and moving through them in a mix of strategy and consulting and solutioning roles. So hopefully I can not only introduce the idea, which might be new to some of you, but address trends that we're seeing, global patterns that we've identified, and then try to give you something really actionable as you're thinking about where do we get started with this new trend and this idea. So again, thank you all for joining today. There's a few of those things that we're going to hit on in our conversation. And I won't spend too much time on the 101, but for those of you that this might be a new topic or a topic you might know by another name, I wanted to just level set really quickly on exactly what it is that we're talking about. So when we talk about conversational commerce, what we're really referring to is the ability to have one-on-one conversations at scale focused on driving revenue. Now, that revenue can come in a lot of different forms. That could be driving folks to a website to continue to drive conversions. That can be a native in-app conversion experience. And that's the unique one that we'll talk about more than most. And it could be a mix of both. One of the key things that we will talk about as a part of this is the role of AI, of bots, of automation to be able to facilitate this at scale. And then a big one that I want to introduce up front, and we're going to circle back around to at the end, is how important it is to have trained staff to be able to handle these conversations. Now, one little nugget that I'll drop as we get started is I was talking to a very big warehouse retailer this year, and we were talking about the role of automated conversations versus those that we would have handled by staff. And they said something that stuck with me ever since. And they said, we don't think this is something that we'll use to sell mustard, but this is something we can use to sell mattresses. That one has stuck with me all year. So I hope that gave somebody a smile. So let's jump into it. What are some of the trends and specifically some of the global dynamics that we see? And then what are the channels and digital spaces that are really aggressively innovating, and try to start giving you a sense of what this looks like, what this might look like for your organization. So first things first, let's take a look at some of those trends. Now, for those of you that have just mapped all of the growth of different digital channels, especially social and messaging channels, over the last 10 to 12 years. This is not going to surprise you to see that China and Southeast Asia continue to lead the way, and this is true in social commerce as well. Social commerce, a big umbrella under which conversational commerce is certainly a key piece. But as we can see here in China, this accounting for about 13% of all e-commerce, and in Southeast Asia, that number even higher, as high as 44%. Folks whose primary device is going to be their mobile device or mobile phone, and then primary apps within those being those social messaging and multifunctional channels. This data is about a year old. I'm excited to give this a refresh to see how those numbers continue to grow even more. But these aren't the only regions and spaces in the world where this is critical. Even if we focus on the US for a moment, we continue to see these numbers rise, and not only rise, but accelerate. Even coming out of the pandemic when we're all stuck at home and had plenty of time to spend on our laptops, now that we are out and back on the move, we expect some of the updated numbers here as well to continue to accelerate. So this is something that continues to grow across the world. As far as the mix of spaces that continue to drive growth and innovation here, it's probably unsurprising to many of you that the Meta family of applications, from Facebook and Instagram over to WhatsApp and more, they continue to lead in the percentage of users that are using those platforms to make a purchase. And then, as we'll talk about, one of the things that makes the conversational piece of this so unique is that not only are they making purchases on these spaces, I'm sure many of us have clicked on an ad, made a purchase, perhaps an impulse purchase, that we see the opportunity now not only to drive links to e-commerce, but to actually have an end-to-end purchasing experience without that user ever leaving the application that we're on. That's going to be the real change in how this is operating. Now, let's take a look at a couple of examples at some of these platforms that are leading the way and exactly how they're doing that. Meta is certainly a leader. They're not the only one that's pushing heavily into the space, but it's certainly a focus. Now, of course, when we think about Meta, and especially when we think about Zuck's focus areas, we talk an awful lot about the metaverse, and that's a whole nother conversation for another time. But even setting aside those virtual worlds for a minute and thinking about the way we use these devices and these platforms, there's opportunities to continue to change and go from, a lot of us embracing things like shoppable links in bio, getting smarter about the way that we showcase and feature our products on these platforms, to again having the end-to-end purchase experience where you're not only promoting those with your marketing and advertising, you're not only providing links within your shoppable experience, but you're actually closing the deal, converting the purchase, collecting the revenue, and that user has never left the application. Now, the benefits for all of our channel partner friends are obvious. Is that if we get these experiences right, then this is going to be an attractive place for you all to continue to invest your advertising dollars. And the experience and opportunity for brands and retailers in particular is thinking about which pieces of your retail experience can you translate into these digital spaces. You think about the best shopping experiences we all try to facilitate. There's a welcoming, there's a showcase of product and service. There's an opportunity to ask questions. Hopefully there's a friendly closing experience, and there's a friendly service experience that's mixed in as well. What we want to try and do across all these spaces is not only deliver a digital version of that best-in-class store experience, but also to take advantage of some of the unique things that the technology facilitates, and trying to figure out how to do that at scale for millions of customers. So Meta leading the way, absolutely. Twitter continues to innovate and experiment here as well, thinking about all of the different ways that they're driving shopping. And not only Meta and Twitter, the obvious, but let's go to our high growth opportunity here as well. Because TikTok, in addition to their explosive user growth and usage growth, continues to move into things and test opportunities like live shopping, direct integration of commerce and retail catalogs, and then providing really creative ad unit inventory to drive to these experiences. So it's not only about facilitating these, it's not only about having the conversations with your customers, but thinking about how this fits across the entire journey, from using ads to educate our customers that these kinds of retail and commerce experiences are even available, to what we want to showcase, how we want to showcase, and who's going to have the conversation for somebody that has questions, especially for some of those higher consideration items that we're offering. Now, two last channels that we shouldn't forget about, and these are our friends Snapchat and Pinterest. Now, in the world of engagement and ad spend, we know that these are not quite as high as those that we've mentioned before. And yet, Snapchat's continued innovation with AR presents some interesting opportunities in the way that we can showcase, in the way that we can facilitate, virtual try on. There's a lot of opportunities here. And then Pinterest as a place where people go to explore, to consider, to build collections. Again, a unique space with a unique audience, a different demographic as well. But continuing to explore ways to facilitate commerce and shopping, and the conversational piece that's so critical in getting this right. Now, for some of you, you're probably hearing me talk through this and thinking, yes, Tyler, of course, I know all of this. And for those of you that feel that way, that's fantastic. I hope this was a nice refresher. For those that this might be new to, you can see how not all this isn't a single trend applied universally. This is something that every single one of these social and messaging spaces is pushing into, and they're all approaching it differently based on their strengths. But again, the core foundation of the idea is somewhat universal. So let me transition for a moment into a little bit of our point of view on this. Where do we start? How do we start? How do we get it right and avoid what we've noticed are some common pitfalls? There are layers to getting this right. And so, from the top down, a key piece of that is the channel strategy that you have, not only in those spaces that we just mentioned, but how that stretches from incorporating and promoting these kinds of available experiences in your paid campaigns, to the way that we're going to facilitate that as a direct messaging experience, the engagement that we want to have, the mentions, the web visits, the care piece of this as well. As I'm sure many of you have experienced, if you have a customer, that has a need for care, you might be promoting a totally different experience, but if they need care, they will ask for support. And so how do we make sure that this is cohesive, that you can present yourselves as a unified experience to the customer, even if internally those might be responsibilities that live in multiple functional groups? So let me share an example. This is anonymized, but a real example of a large B2C technology brand and retailer that has really embraced this, from supporting live chat experiences and bots, to offering opportunities for appointments, co-browsing, and then even facilitated commerce conversations. This is an organization that has really embraced that. And as a result of connecting this and expanding this as a part of the chat conversations that are available, this is something where they've driven higher satisfaction for customers that have gone through these experiences. And thanks to the use of a really smart application of automation and AI, yes, powered by Sprinkler, they've also been able to do that much faster. So we're going to continue to talk more about this, but it's not only about facilitating and offering these experiences, but thinking about which of these we can automate and which of these are going to require that agent intervention, and how we support and scale that as well. So pretty exciting example at a really extremely high scale. This is one of our organizations that has embraced this quite quickly. Now, in addition to this, it's not only that we're responding faster and those customers are happier, they're driving revenue from units to order value to units sold. So some really exciting concrete examples of what they can realize from it. And this is something where they've delivered that cohesively across all of the channels that you see here. So not only how we deliver that on the phone, but how do we translate that experience into these social and messaging opportunities? And then how do we make sure that we're providing those folks having these conversations with customers with as much as we already know about them if they're a current customer, and then try to learn as much as we can throughout that conversation to build that understanding of that customer. Now, I mentioned before that incorporating this into our paid strategy is critical. So as we do that, I mentioned different types of inventory. You can take a look at even the two examples that we see here. Rather than driving out to the website, which is of course a critical part of any e-commerce strategy, this new inventory is starting to offer different calls to action. The opportunity to drive to a conversational experience, contact us, let's talk about what you're looking for, or to drive directly to an in-channel catalog experience if you already know exactly what you're trying to buy. So in so many ways, again, this is facilitating experiences that we might have in person, but starting to get a little more creative about how those live within these channels and trying to facilitate a better experience in channel without creating holes in the funnel by pushing that customer off to a web experience, different mobile experiences, or somewhere else. We can keep them where they are, where they chose to engage with us, and try and facilitate the conversion right there. And again, this is an organization that saw better reach, better impressions, a lower CPM, and a lower cost of acquisition. So we certainly have had some successes along the way, many, many more examples that we're happy to share for follow-ups for those interested. Now, part of this is getting channel strategy right. A critical part of this is the role of automation and AI. Not AI, the buzzword, AI, the thing that helps us identify what folks are looking for and try to facilitate the right conversation every single time. Now, what does that actually look like? For us, we have many applications of AI across our entire solution. I'm going to highlight just a couple of examples that are really critical to facilitate commerce. One of those is for every single message that we detect, every mention of our brand, every indirect or direct opportunity. Is this thing actually engageable, or is it just noise, nonsense, or spam? Then we take it a level deeper. When we detect that conversation, is it somebody that needs support? Great, let's get it right to our friends that are ready to support them. Is it an inquiry? Is it a complaint? Or is it a lead? Is it someone expressing buying intent? All of this we deliver through trained machine learning. All of this we have with retail specific industry models. And then we want to work and facilitate with you workflows within your organization to make sure we get these moments to the right people. Now we apply this and append it to every single conversation that we detect and capture, either directly or from listening, or even from first-party data and conversations you might feed through us. We detect the right approach needed, and then we want to facilitate those regardless of the channel where they might be happening. And it's so common, and I'm sure many of you have facilitated these kinds of conversations where someone just says, what are they wearing? What is that? How do I find that? And this is an opportunity to turn a conversation into a sale with the scale and the filtering and the focus that's required to get it right. Now, we've helped several organizations to do this. This typically comes from one side of the house or the other. Sometimes it's a marketing-driven initiative, and then they're looking for the staff to support. And sometimes, like in the case with Dell, we're looking for a care organization that sees an opportunity to drive revenue. And so they had really smart routing and automation. And yes, they do partner with Sprinklr on all of this. But then they extended it to say, well, what about those folks that don't need support? The folks that are trying to buy, the folks that are interested in a sales conversation for some of those B2B or higher consideration moments. This is an opportunity that they've been able to facilitate using all of the approaches that we've discussed. And let me keep us moving in the interest of time, because there's just a couple extra critical parts here. We talked about the handoff. Knowing who's going to manage those conversations is one of the harder parts of getting this program right. And we want to use technology to make this easier where we can by directly incorporating catalogs into the conversations that we can have to try to make that as simple as possible. In addition to getting the staffing right and incorporating things like catalogs and inventory, then we want to give them the opportunity to shop where they want. And in the interest of sharing, one more example, here's a direct quote from another organization that we're lucky enough to work with and support. that thinks about this across all those stages, like I mentioned earlier, from exploration to recommendation to their experience with the products, all the way through to those moments where you might need support, and an opportunity for a couple of their leaders talking about the success they've had using messaging, using what we would call conversational commerce to drive sales and revenue. And even the opportunity to talk about what it looks like to do this across 2,000 individuals. Now, if some of you are looking at this and thinking, these organizations are much bigger than me, we definitely don't have 2,000 people that we can retrain and allocate and prepare for this. That's okay. We have really big retail clients of ours that are getting started by carving off even 5 or 10 individuals, running tests and experiments to figure out what are the right parts of your catalog to test this conversational commerce approach, and what is the portion of your care organization that you might be able to retrain or reallocate. Because we've learned from so many of our clients that marketing understands how to sell, but care has scale and operational rigor and is already embracing automation, and in many cases already embracing AI. So a big part of getting this right is connecting those two sides of the house to figure out within any retailer, how can we make this happen? How can we take the skills that care has, the focus that marketing has, and the customer expectation that you'll meet them where they are to find a new way to drive commerce and drive revenue. So let me jump us ahead, because I want to get to next steps, and I certainly want to get to some of the questions that you all might have. So if some of you are hearing this and starting to think about questions, just drop those in the chat, and we're going to head there in just a moment. A couple of key things that make this approach different and make the way that Sprinklr supports our clients different is that we want to be able to facilitate this across multiple channels. We're talking about everything from email to voice to messaging to social, and to make that cohesive, and importantly, to make that feel like a single unified experience, whether they're reaching out because of an interest in a product or because they have a need for support. We use AI to find and understand those intents and make sure they get to the right side of the house, and then give you the opportunity to advertise, to sell, and to support, not only in one platform with Sprinklr, but to be able to make that a single experience in whatever channel your customers are using to reach out. So 2 last ideas, and then we'll jump into some of those questions. But of course, we want to try and make today actionable, not just educational. So where do we start? Of course, we've got a little crawl, run, walk. And as we do that, first, it's thinking about what are the moments that we want to go after first? And do we have the technology and the workflow that we might need to understand the intent of those moments? One of the things that we do, for example, with a lot of our clients that are experimenting and beginning pilots or tests, is we just look back at the last year of conversation, and we'll show them, we'll use our approaches to automatically classify all the moments that we have across all the different channels we talked about. What are the intents? How many people are trying to buy, and what are they talking about when they do? Then we start thinking about scale and routing and assignments, and what are the recommendations that we could make, and how could we do some of that at least automatically to limit the impact on the staffing. Then it's how do we think about facilitating orders, integrating catalogs? How do we facilitate payment on these channels? It's a little different on a lot of those different channels that we talked about. And then as we manage things like notifications, order status, product experience, even all the way through to fulfillment, all of these are critical pieces of getting this right. And of course, there is a role for technology to play all the way through. But if I leave you with one thing, yes, the technology is there. The approaches with automation and AI to understand those folks that are trying to purchase, to understand which channels these conversations are happening in, that's all possible today. But a critical thing that I will say is a part of almost every conversation with every retailer last year that is starting to explore this and thinking about what this looks like for 2023, it's about the cross-functional collaboration. It is more than purchasing any platform, even as great as I think Sprinklr is, turning it on and saying, we're good. It's so important to think about how we get marketing and the care organization that has the operation and the staff and the approach and experience in those conversations, combined with that sales and marketing focus, to be able to use these channels to drive revenue in a net new way. So with that, I would love to pop open that chat window, take a look at some of the questions you all have. If some of you would like to add some, please do. We got about 5 minutes, so let me take a look at these and see what we can address. All right, first question I'm taking a look at, and thank you all for sharing these. This one comes from Lindsay Smith, I think, which asks, what are some of the best practices in mature conversational commerce? It's a really good question. I think our most mature clients that have approached this are deploying this across multiple channels, whereas I would say less mature would start with just one. For example, building a Facebook Messenger strategy for commerce, rather building a universal strategy that can stretch across those organizations. I also think there's a difference in doing that kind of test and experiment approach by maybe carving off a little bit of a small portion of a care agent team's time. Our more mature clients have dedicated folks who are focused on that kind of sales concierge experience exclusively. I hope that helps, Lindsay. Second question is, I see, what's the biggest mistake that we've seen companies make in trying to introduce this? Without being too critical of some of our clients that we love, I will say there was a massive retailer that got started with this, carved off a small portion of their product portfolio to test, and tried to run it exclusively with their marketing team. And to be short about it, they were overwhelmed by the volume. There was a ton of demand for customers trying to purchase those products and have product purchase conversations. And they just didn't have the scale. They weren't quite ready. So as we take them from what was a successful but shorter pilot than they expected, just because they ran out of the inventory they had allocated, as we look to scale that globally for them and across product categories, it's all about looking at that collaboration with the service organization and trying to figure out the right way to staff and the right way to automate. Let me keep rolling. Lindsay, thank you for collecting these. Third question is about, we're struggling to get started. Do you have any advice? I would love to learn more about what exactly that struggle is. So, please don't hesitate to follow up after this session. But without knowing more, I would say my immediate advice is start by understanding the intents of the conversations you've had. And then if you're struggling with scale or just a place to narrow a test or a pilot, I would suggest focusing in on a smaller product set, a smaller product category set, and then pick 1 or 2 channels to get started on and carve that off. And of course, a critical thing for any test or pilot, make sure you've got your clear success criteria and your timing, and that the partners you're working with are there to support you. This is net new for almost everyone. Yes, we're all used to e-commerce, but facilitating in these channels, in these ways, with this approach, it's a little new for everybody. Let me try and take perhaps just one more. I apologize for running long on time. How do we think the field of conversational commerce is going to evolve? Wow, it really could go in so many directions. I think one of the ways that it will evolve is truly end-to-end, from exploration to conversion, payment, fulfillment notifications in-app. I think in e-commerce, we've seen new technologies emerge to try and facilitate that at scale. I'm thinking Shopify when I say that. But really, what does it look like when TikTok owns the entire experience? What is Meta going to do to compete? What are they going to do in the metaverse to make that experience accessible, but more successful and more revenue generating as well? All right. So at the risk of taking more and not giving those questions the time and attention they deserve, I think I'll stop us with the questions there. Nicholas, if there's anything you want to jump back in to share, please do. But as we wrap our time today, I hope this was interesting. I hope this was educational, brought you all some new ideas. And of course, if you're a current Sprinklr client, please don't hesitate to reach out to your team to ask more about examples, where to start, what a test or a pilot might look like. Always happy to have that conversation. And for those of you that are not, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly via email, via LinkedIn, or with our events email alias here. I'm always happy to share more about what we're seeing in retail, what we're seeing in commerce, and try to give you a sense of where we can all get started to be successful this year. Thank you all for your time. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Great. Thank you, Tyler, for such an insightful presentation. I also want to thank everyone for joining us today for this fantastic thought leadership. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.